Welcome back to the Changemaker Podcast. I'm your host, Deke Copenhaver. Today, my guest is my friend, Chris Cooper. Chris has over a 30-year career, worked with major global brands to small entrepreneurial ventures, developing exceptional leaders, teams, and highly engaged workforces. Chris has hosted since 2011 the Business Elevation Show, which I got to be a guest on, which in 2019 was the most accessed business show on the world's leading online radio platform, Voice of America. There are so many other things. He's a published author. And in 2019, during a midlife crisis, he competed in Scotland's toughest one-day endurance event. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Chris Cooper.
Welcome to the Changemaker Podcast, hosted by Deke Copenhaver. Deke is the author of The Changemaker, a Forbes publishing book that has reached #1 on Amazon on multiple occasions and in multiple categories like management skills and total quality management. During this podcast, Deke interviews exceptional change-making leaders. Deke currently operates Copenhaver Consulting, where he helps local governments and other public organizations maximize their potential. He's also a sought-after public speaker. We hope that the Changemaker has an impact on you today and that you find takeaways that make you a better leader in your life. Now, here's Deke.
Deke, wonderful to be with you today. Thank you.
Yeah, man. Well, welcome back. And this is our second shot at this. We did one interview. It didn't work out, but I'm like, I think God is just saying, you guys are so good when you speak that you guys need to talk together again.
So that sounds good. Apparently I was a bit passionate last time and caused my microphone to peak. So I'll try and contain myself a little bit today.
I think passion is good. But Chris, just for our listeners, our viewers, tell them, how you came to this point in your life, became a coach, a published author, hugely popular worldwide podcast. What led Chris Cooper to this point?
Well, thank you, Deke. I was brought up in a very northern English steel town called Scunthorpe, and there wasn't great expectations of me, to be honest. My father was a steel worker. My mum did some part-time jobs, and money was a little bit hard to come by. And I remember my dad going on strike when the coal miners in the UK in Margaret Thatcher's days went out on strike. And I think what it was, Deke, there was a point in my life that really, I think everything kind of changed for me, because I was on a trajectory and expected to go into the steelworks like my father, like my grandfather. And I remember going to the steelworks with my dad. And it was one of these evenings, a little bit like, McDonald's and their Happy Meals sort of gets kids in early. I was about 12 or 13, and I went with my dad to the steelworks and for this open evening. And we walked around the works with lots of other parents and their mostly sons. And it was dark, it was dirty, it was noisy. There was molten metal flying around, there was a lot of sort of acrid kind of smell and bangs and crashes. And afterwards, we walked into this room and had a few sandwiches, and this very tall man suddenly appeared. And my dad whispered to me, "Chris is the CEO, the Chief Executive Officer, British Steel." And my dad had never even spoken to this guy before. And he walks in and he walks straight over to me and he said, "Son, when you're older, are you going to come and work for us?" And I said, "You must be joking." And my dad yelled at me all the way home. How can you do that? One day you might want to work there. And I think what I realized in me was that there was something I needed to stretch my wings. And I look back on that time and that story. And my dad worked there for something like 45 years. He passed 5 years ago. And I look back on that and I think, what a shame. My dad worked somewhere that he didn't enjoy working. He enjoyed the community and had friends there, but he didn't enjoy going to the works. He worked double shifts. The conditions weren't great at all. They were quite dangerous, and there was all sorts of challenges and stress. And I thought, look back on that, I think, and I wanted to get on because I wanted to help people like my dad to end up working in places that they enjoyed, because I do a lot of work around leadership and teams and culture. And I want to create kind of cultures and environments and leaders that can get the best out of people and themselves and contribute to great well-being. So I think, I went through college and university and was the first to go to university. And I worked for big companies like Mars and United Biscuits, and I became a director of a big pub group, and I set up a business that did pretty well. But 17 years ago, I realized that if I didn't change the way I was working, I was probably going to end up only seeing my children at the weekend. So I made a decision to focus on what I love, which is people. And since then, I've been working and mostly individually, but with people around me, sometimes other consultants, and bringing people into projects. But I've been, I guess, contributing in a different way to I hope, a better world, and learned a lot on the way, really.
Well, you and I are both big music fans.
Yeah.
And so I've never been to sort of the steel towns in England, but Black Sabbath from Birmingham, I was always fascinated in reading about them, that being in a steel town, what that really contributed to their sound, just oppressive and loud and everything. That's just that growing up in that place really influenced the world of rock and roll through Black Sabbath.
It did, yeah. And yeah, Black Sabbath from Birmingham, that's about 40 miles away from me, and I go there regular. And I believe in that time it was very industrial, and it was dark, and it was noisy, and there were factories, and out of those factories came some pretty tough men, and they formed, some of them formed Black Sabbath, and the sound was metallic, it was loud, it was noisy, it was had a lot of angst and frustration. But yeah, I think another one I quite like is Def Leppard, and they come from Sheffield. That's a steel town as well. And I think my first ever band that I loved was called Saxon, and they came from Barnsley, I think it was. Again, another
Saxon.
Another northern town. So yeah, the new wave of British heavy metal didn't all come from London.
Yeah, well, let me ask you this though. So you being the first in your family to go to college, to go to university, what is that like? It would seem like if you grow up in those places, it's like you said, the head of British Steel saying, "Are you going to come to work for us?" There would generally be an expectation that that's what you were going to do, because probably generation after generation does it. What was that like to have that discussion with your father to say you were going to chart a different path?
Yeah, I think deep down, my father, after we'd got over what I'd said, he, I think he wanted more from me, and I think although his horizons had seemed very limited, really, he was very supportive of me going and doing something else. So that was great. But the funny thing was, I did actually end up going to work in the steelworks. I used to work in my summer holidays, and I probably have one of the toughest experience of holiday jobs that anybody had. I used to work in blast furnaces after they'd been off for a couple of weeks, cleaning the scale out of them with wooden clogs and being timed to go in for just 10 minutes because you would pass out. And so I experienced all of that hard working, and I experienced what it was like to work in a factory doing tough jobs. And I'm so pleased I actually did go and work in the works. And what happened there too was my dad found that work for me, because he was in the works, and he found an opportunity for me, and he partly did it because he thought I'd never stick it.
Yeah.
And it was almost like slightly amusing to him, but he was so proud that I did, which was and so I got my respect from my dad, that actually I was prepared to get my hands dirty and work hard, but also I then decided to work hard academically because I wanted to get out. And I think when you've got that, when you come from a background that was it was okay, my background, it wasn't as hard as some people have in terms of hardship, but I think when you come from that, you appreciate it, and you do things like work hard to get on, because the money that's helping you to go through that process has been very, very hardly earned.
Well, I want to get your take on this, and I'm going to tell a story on myself that most of my listeners probably have never heard. But one thing, I come from a background in politics, but here in the States, you see so many people in politics that went to private schools, went to Ivy League schools, and they've never really had a lot of interaction with your common man. So I went through a program called Leadership Georgia, where we went to the Supreme Court, and Clarence Thomas, who's in the news also very regularly now, said the Supreme Court is not representative of the United States of America because everybody here either has a degree from an Ivy League school or Stanford. And I thought that was an interesting take. But when I was 17 years old, I was putting in sprinkler systems, which I didn't enjoy. But my parents were out of town. I snuck into a bar on a Sunday night, ended up meeting these guys that have a tile company, Masterclass Flooring. We go back to my house, drink up the liquor cabinet. So the next day, the owner calls me and he's like, "Man, what'd you do today?" I said, "I went up and I went to school." He said, "Well, I want to restock your liquor cabinet, but anybody that can go to school after a night like we had last night, you've got a job if you want it."
Yeah.
So 17 years old. So I was working, 16-hour days for an entire summer. We were, working at one hospital, putting in the burn unit. Then we would go to dinner, then go to another and put in the OR suites until midnight. They were Irish Catholic. And then we'd go out, start the same thing at 7 o'clock the next morning. But I said, that did two things. It gave me a great appreciation for, that hopefully I was not going to have to do that for a career. But also I would tell people, I'd tell kids, particularly when I was in office, I learned to trade. And if my life goes to hell in a handbasket, I can still go lay tile.
Yeah.
So, but having that experience, which unfortunately, I think a lot of people in leadership positions have never had that experience, being shoulder to shoulder in a work environment with your average person.
Definitely. I think it's so important to do that, and I think it's so important for people who are working in senior positions to actually go and do some of that work.
Yeah.
So if you are in politics, go out with a dustbin cart and clean the streets.
Yeah.
I remember working when I worked in the pub industry. I was a director of a very, very large pub group, but I went and spent time working in pubs, and I served pints, and I went and served food. And actually, it was quite uncomfortable serving food, to be honest, because some people, when you serve them, are sort of, you could see them seeing a male in his, at the time I was probably in my mid-30s, serving food, and there's people looking at you and treating you as though you've not achieved in life, and being disrespectful to you. But it's good to do that, because then you realise what it's truly like. I think you've got to go and experience that and ground yourself.
Well, I think that creates a sense of empathy, but it's too, so when I was in office, we did a big redevelopment initiative in a neighborhood called Laney Walker Bethlehem. So it was really the hub of African-American business decades and decades ago. But then people moved out, there was disinvestment, and it just became a very blighted, crime-infested neighborhood. But when I was 17 years old, many of the tile mechanics that I worked with, who were true masters of a craft, were older black gentlemen that didn't have their licenses, that lived in that neighborhood. So I'd have to go pick them up and bring them to work. So when I got in office, I'm like, I knew people in that neighborhood. I knew that neighborhood. And so it really gave me compassion and empathy to say this should be a priority for the city to redevelop this neighborhood. But had I not had the experience at 17 years old of getting to know people that live there, I'd have never had that understanding.
Mm. Yeah, so important. So important. One of my favorite TV shows, actually, I love Undercover Boss.
Yeah.
You watch that? I just
Oh, yeah.
feel it's just great. It's great to see, a senior person really struggling and getting fired for not being able to do the basic of tasks. But actually, they learn, don't they? Their consciousness shifts once they've been through that experience.
They do. And I think that is one of the biggest dangers of leadership is when people become siloed or insular. I'll give you a great example here. So, in the U.S., we're looking at a potential governmental shutdown. Congress has not been able to reach an agreement to this point. Maybe they will, but to keep our government open. Political gamesmanship. But you're looking at, huge amounts of people, basically our military going without paychecks, government employees. So at the same time, the U.S. Senate, the head of the Senate majority party, wanted to lighten the dress code to allow for one member that, has not been doing well physically to not have to wear a suit and tie. So there's this massive debate over the dress code in the Senate. And I'm sitting there going, we're looking at a governmental shutdown, Americans not being able to pay their bills, and you guys are saying a priority should be the dress code of the Senate. But I'm like, the optics on that, it looks like, that's just like, okay, you're just tipping your hand. We're totally out of touch with the common man.
Yeah. I mean, how much too is the media focusing in on the wrong things too?
Yeah.
Has that been driven by, I don't know, I hear a lot about Fox News over here, and has it been driven by certain media channels suddenly?
It probably has, but that's the thing is that, I think we talked the last time about, so, they hyper focus, the media does, on dysfunction. So you may have heard of a congressman from Georgia, Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's a firebrand that's known nationally. She gets 10 times more media coverage than anybody else in Congress. She's passed like 3 pieces of legislation the whole time she's been there. But she just makes these outlandish remarks and everything. And it's like, why does she deserve, when she's not really doing anything, to get 10 times the coverage of somebody else?
Yeah. Well, that sort of situation leads to people being sensational, doesn't it? It drives a certain behaviour, I guess, that courts publicity and gets heard. However, it's often the wrong things that are getting focused on. I think when I remember talking to you and you talking about, obviously, and I agree with you, what people are most interested is a roof over their head and healthcare and having a safe neighbourhood and the children in school, and those are the things that are really important to were important to my family, certainly when I was growing up.
Absolutely. Well, I have you. So I talk a lot about the tyranny of the minority, where, oftentimes the loudest group gets their way on any given issue. So it seems like that's not just in the U.S. This extreme polarization with, the loudest ends on either side sort of driving the debate. But what was your take on Brexit? And it seems like British politics has some of that too, the sort of divisiveness, but maybe it's not the people with common sense that are ultimately pushing the final decision on any given issue.
Yeah, I mean, I can get quite emotional about Brexit. I'll be honest. Myself and my wife were strong Remainers.
Yeah,
We feel that actually being part of the European Union keeps a dialogue open, enables collaboration. We had the ability to travel, comfortably between borders, and actually, although some of our legislation had to go via Brussels, sometimes I like that extra check in the
yeah,
system. um,
yeah,
so I personally felt it was a really awful thing. I personally felt, but there were other people with different views. What I think I didn't like in it was there was one particular politician who eventually became prime minister, and he was a Remainer, and then he saw an opportunity. A number of people that were interested in leaving, and he suddenly, I think, saw an opportunity for power, and suddenly said, let's leave the European Union, follow me.
yeah,
So he threw his name in the hat, and then we also had a lot of interference with research companies who focused on about 3 million people who didn't vote with
yeah,
heavy social media. So that happened. There's obviously could well be the influence from other foreign powers in there too. And I think we've come out on a decision which is increasing the costs of a lot for people here. It's making it
yeah,
harder for them to holiday, harder to travel. We've got massive inflation over here, over 10%. It's dropped a bit of late, but huge increase in utility, all those sorts of things. And Brexit, I'm sure, hasn't helped. And I'm hearing a lot of empty premises and things in London now.
yeah,
It's a real time when I think we didn't need Brexit. I think we needed to be together with others. So I think this frustration when techniques are used to move people down a view which puts others into power. Um, so yeah, but I could get very upset about it. I think we were upset for about 3 or 4 weeks afterwards, my wife and I.
yeah. Well, but you coach on leadership. You're an expert on leadership, and to me, you know, leadership does not mean you can't change your point of view. I mean,
Yeah,
I think we
true.
grow and evolve as people, but when people are, it's political opportunism, and I say it here in the U.S. Right now, Donald Trump is just polling, but I'll get into that. I think polls are so inaccurate. I mean, because I'm sure they do the same thing in England. They call landlines, and it's like, who answers a landline? Or if you're basing it on Facebook or whatever. But Trump is the front runner based on the polls. I would argue, I think the polls are missing something. But in 16, there were so many Republicans that said, we won't, this man, he's terrible. We will never support him. We are never Trumpers. And here in, 2023, some of those same people are still, you know, towing the line for him. And apparently, behind the scenes, they can't stand the guy,
Yeah,
but they're not willing to say anything to draw his ire, in front of the cameras. I'm like, that's not leadership, and that's not courage. That's just trying to keep your position of power.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I kind of look at politicians and I think, is that person somebody who I would see as being a good influence on my children and the
Yeah,
behavior I want to see? I think politics does attract people who have tendencies towards at different degrees of some people, not everybody, but of narcissism and Machiavellianism and psychopathy. Probably heard people can Google the dark triad, which is these shadowy psychological behaviors that are often found in politics and in business. People who are very charismatic, but they're also that don't have a lot of fear, don't have a lot of empathy, are driven by power. And I think what we want is not, you do need to have people who are very ambitious to do these jobs. I wouldn't want to do the job. Got to be honest, I haven't got wouldn't have the stomach for it. So you need to have some of that. But I think they have to have people best interest in mind first. It's a bit more servant leadership than leading with narcissism and undermining others and playing games.
Well, I think so much of it to me is modeling the behavior. As you said, you want to have leaders that your kids can look up to, but you have to model the behavior, and it's not easy. Particularly in politics, when it's built around winning elections and scoring points by telling people what they want to hear, not what they need to hear. But I'm very much focused on character. And I said for 9 years in office, but I'll still say it, that if I had to win an election or to get ahead in business, I had to compromise my character, I'd rather lose an election or not get ahead. But it's just that's the message sending to our kids, that it's win at all costs.
Yeah.
That's just, my dad raised me to believe in sportsmanship. And part of sportsmanship is being a good loser. And we're never going to win everything.
No, that's right. And we sometimes learn more when we do about ourselves when we do lose.
Well, it's interesting, Chris. So I had the opportunity several weeks ago to speak for the National Governors Alliance here in the States. So the chairman's name is Spencer Cox. He's the governor of Utah. Young guy, 47, very moderate Republican, very likable, very earnest. People of Utah love him. But he started an initiative this year while he's chairman called Disagree Better. So they're cutting public service announcements with Democrat and Republican governors saying, look, we don't agree on everything politically, but we can agree to the fact that we're going to work together to tackle the big picture issues facing America. So I went up there. I get my voice operated on tomorrow. I was supposed to get it operated on the day before I went, but I told him it was too important for me to come up here and support you guys in what you're doing, because you're modeling the behavior the vast majority of Americans want to see.
Yeah.
And it's my hope when people see governors doing this, they'll say to their congressmen or people in Washington, hey, why aren't you doing that too?
Yeah. I like that. Disagree better. Yeah. Not go into the gutter and disagree and leave people not ripped apart, but full of respect for each other. Maybe.
Exactly.
I remember talking to you a little earlier in the year, and you talked to me about the importance of decision making and about the importance of being able to really put yourself into the other person's viewpoint as well.
Yeah.
As well as your own viewpoint. I think that's really important. I took that away from our conversation, that we need to make better decisions, but we need to not make a decision just because it's stick with it just because it's ours and we thought of it first.
Yeah. Well, and you part of what you do is you unite other leaders, which I love, because we can all learn from each other. But I want you to speak a little bit about that to our listeners and our viewers, and I want to get your take on this. To me, leadership is nuanced. I mean, it means being able to listen, change your point of view, but so politics is not so much, because it's driven by sound bites and rhetoric, which are not nuanced. So as you're convening these groups of leaders, I mean, what are you learning from people? And I think sometimes people think that the state of leadership in the world is terrible. And I'm like, no, there are great leaders like yourself all over the world. But unfortunately, they might not be the ones getting the press coverage.
I think that's very true. I think what we do, it is easy to forget, is actually there is so much good going on in the world as well as what we hear in the headlines. And I meet lots of people and speak to lots of people who are out there doing good things. They're building communities of people who are positively contributing to the world, whether it's a better environment, whether it's helping people off the streets, whether it's helping drug users. I spoke to someone last week who was helping people who are being groomed for extreme groups, and he was in an extreme group. So there are so many people out there doing good things. We just got to be mindful that it isn't all bad, and that there is hope, and there are wonderful things happening. When if we can Google them and we can seek them out, and I think we need to maybe access some of our own news, rather than access what is force fed our way.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting to me that, one of the knocks on the bridging movement that I'm very much a part of is, well, you just want everybody to conform to be all alike and to sing Kumbaya. And I'm like, that's not it at all. I mean, leadership is about bringing together people from differing points of view, and we can disagree. And disagreeing is healthy. I'm like, in your marriage, do you and your wife agree on everything? I'm like, come on, we've got relationship models for this. My mom and dad were married for over 40 years. She was a liberal Democrat. He was a conservative Republican. They never voted the same way in a presidential election in over 40 years of marriage. So we've got models for this, but it's usually extremists that try to put that knock on people trying to bring people together. But I'm like, you think about it, it's the extremists that really want you to conform to their views. They don't want you to think for yourself. And so I'm like, basically, what they're trying to say, what we're doing in bridging and bringing people doing great things together is exactly the opposite of what they accuse us of doing, but it is, in fact, what they're doing.
Absolutely. And I know you're doing this. Myself, what I've been doing is I've created a community of people in the second half of their careers who are very experienced and wise souls, done amazing things, and I brought them together, and I have other people I'm inviting into that community. And what's interesting is we're kind of all wanting to stick together because we're out there doing things in the world which you can get knocked down for. You can get criticized for, and actually by being in a community of people who are partly outliers, it's just a bit of safety in numbers and security in numbers. And of course, what I'm realizing is that we all have challenges in life, so we're supporting ourselves with those too, but we're also supporting each other with the initiatives that we're developing to contribute to a better world. I think it's important to find those groups of people that do keep you inspired, do fill you with hope, do fill you with energy, do support you when you're down, because we all need lifting from time to time, and we all have health challenges from time to time, and we all have family challenges, and you really understand this, Deke. So I think it's important to find those people and find those places and come together, and I think together you can impact more and other people on a similar with a similar wavelength. You might not always agree with them, but they can sometimes put life into perspective in a better way.
It's interesting though. So I don't exist within a bubble or a silo. So I've been blessed to have my life intersect with people like you. Speaking in New Hampshire at that National Governors Association event, there were probably 200 people from all different political ideologies. There were governors, there were representatives, people from all over the country that all agreed extreme polarization is an issue that we need to address.
Yeah.
So it was that safety in numbers. But then this week I was talking to my sister and she said, but what do you do? Because if you're in the middle and you raise your hand and say, no, I'm not an extremist, she said, you're going to get attacked. So I can understand how people feel that way because maybe they don't have access to the platforms and the groups that we do. They're that strong support system, which is sad, really.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? It is. I think for me, I try and look, connect with people who, have got goodness at heart. People who are kind and are warm and are, loving and at heart and supportive, and those people that we can feel a common sense of values with, and you can meet those people anywhere, but it's often we bump into people and it feels like there's a connection. I think we have to be careful though. One of the things I was talking about with I should mention his name, but I've forgotten his name. Chap I'm interviewing shortly, well, in the new year, about kind of hate groups. Is that quite a lot of people who feel disenfranchised and maybe haven't got those connections and are feeling, maybe feel, some shame about something. It's called toxic shame. Those people can be reached out to by groups who believe in very extreme things, and because suddenly they're welcomed in, and they feel like they found someone. So I think we've got to be really careful to be very protective of our subconscious minds and think big picture about those people we're connecting with and those views we're connecting with.
Well, our good friend Dov Barron introduced me to Tony McAleer.
Yeah, Tony McAleer, that's who I was talking to.
You do? But I'm like, former white supremacist who now is the top guy in the world for bringing people out of the movement. But I interviewed Tony too, but he said they made me feel like I belong.
Yeah.
And, Dov makes a really good point that there's a difference between fitting in and belonging. Fitting in may mean you have to compromise your character to be a part of something. Belonging, they accept you warts and all. And I think that might be something good about, not good, but effective about that movement is disaffected people. They're like, oh, society might not want you, but we'll take you warts and all.
Yeah. Well, I interviewed a guy called David Allison who has a company called Value Graphics, and they've done over 1 million surveys looking at identifying people's values. And they identified in America, the number one value in America is belonging, and the second one is family. And I think in Canada, it's the other way around. Family comes first and belonging. So there's clearly in the United States a lot of desire. People belong to football teams and baseball and basketball and politics and political parties. And there's a great desire to belong to something that resonates with you. But I think great care needs to be taken as to what you choose to belong to, and have to make sure that you are being the leader of your own destiny and not allowing you to be led by somebody else just because you felt an arm of friendship moving in your direction.
Well, you and I are both huge music fans, but talking about that, I'm like, okay, music just is a great unifier. It brings people together. You said you're a Def Leppard fan. Does everybody at a Def Leppard show have the same politics? Probably not. But they're all there because they like Def Leppard. And I'm like, Taylor Swift does an amazing job of this. You've got all these disaffected youths, and she does it in a positive way. So, and it's cross generational, but kids that don't feel like they fit in anyplace else, they go to a Taylor Swift show, and it's like magic. We all fit in. We all love Taylor. So they're examples of things that are positive and not toxic, of ways to draw people in. And I'm like, in the bridging movement, those are the things we need to look to. What's effective? And music is one of those things.
Absolutely. Music reaches huge swathes of people, doesn't it? As does sport.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was at a weekend before last. There was a 2-day festival in Leicestershire with lots and lots of old sort of 80s and 90s, but the Pretenders. Chrissy Hind was there, and Kylie Minogue and Tears for Fears, and lots of different bands.
Sweet.
But it was great, actually. All sorts. I particularly like Deke and Blue. I'd never really had any interest in, but I thought they were fantastic. But it really did bring people together in a lovely way. Actually, you feel a connection with a lot of the people who were there, and it's lovely, seeing how much love there was for some of the performers, not all of them, but for some of them. Who I think Kylie's very good, for example, with the with the gay communities. They absolutely adore her.
Yeah.
Always reached out to them, LGBTQ sort of community, and they feel a great affinity with her. And I guess it's helped her sell records, but it also has brought love into their lives, really.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a concert or a festival is a communal experience, but I got to bounce this one off you, Chris. So I was at a prayer breakfast. We started a prayer breakfast my first day in office 18 years ago, December. So it's non-denominational, still going on after 18 years. We've been to synagogues and everything. But so I got handed a microphone, and it's like all of this stuff, thinking about it, and asked to pray. And I said, I think that when people define unity by thinking that everybody's going to agree and compromise themselves to fit in, they're missing it. I said, each of us is different individually, like snowflakes are. Every snowflake is different, but when they combine into a snowfall that covers the ground, it's a thing of beauty, and it reflects light magnificently. So I do write poetry too, but but I sent that to a minister friend of mine, and she's like, yeah, I always thought that unity, you had to just throw up your hands and throw up the white flag and say, I give. I'm like, that's not it. It's just everybody has their own role to play, and we celebrate everybody's different.
When will people realize that we live in a diverse world with all sorts of different people, and it's designed that way, isn't it? It is that way, and actually, it's one of the beautiful things. You go into nature, and there's huge diversity within nature, and it's all forms one big system. I don't think the world was meant to be, one type of person. It just wasn't. One type of, people sit within their religions, and they sit within their politics, and they sit within their gender or race, or actually we're all one. We're all human beings, and that's one of the wonderful things I think about this world is difference.
I totally agree with you, and I think that's when we talk about concerts or festivals. I mean, how cool! How many different types of people do you meet when you're there from different walks of life? You probably never would have met them other than having gone there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've got to just take care. We've got to take care with this. There are some subjects where it's actually quite difficult to talk about in case you slip up with incorrect language. The language that isn't inclusive, for example. And I'm sort of noticing that a bit of late, where people are actually avoiding having the discussions because they're
Yeah.
scared, even though they're filled with kindness and genuine intent and love. They don't feel they can approach a situation in case they get it wrong. And I think we've got to try and overcome that, really, because we all need to be together.
Oh, yeah. And that's, I did a diversity, equity, inclusion workshop a while back, and they sent me 100 pages of what I was supposed to say and not say.
Mm.
And I'm like, and it ended up going great. But did I read those 100 pages? No, because I'm like, if I'm sitting there thinking I've memorized 100 pages of what I can and can't say, how am I going to connect with the audience when I'm like, oh my gosh, should I say this? Should I say that?
Yeah.
No. I'm like, you got to let it flow free. And there's got to be some forgiveness involved. We're going to make mistakes. I mean, we don't all speak the same language. But if we can have a conversation, we can more get on the page of the same language.
Definitely. Yeah. So I slipped up myself a couple of weeks ago. I said something at an event, which I hadn't realised wasn't wasn't I won't say what I said, but it wasn't inclusive to somebody who was there, and they were very offended by it. And I've written to them, and we're going to have a conversation about it, because I was approaching it with such good intention.
Yeah.
I think they realise that. I think they realise that, and it's all going to be absolutely fine. But I was quite mortified that actually I had upset them, when my intentions were so good, and so honest. But it is so easy to avoid this situation because you might slip up. So I'd rather actually slip up, and I think actually it will be good from the conversation that we will have. And I want this person to actually take a lead on diversity rather than me doing it, if it's that important to them. And their ability to navigate the language is better than mine. I'd like them to take that lead, not me.
I agree.
It's a middle-aged white male.
Yeah, but this just in for our listeners and viewers. Chris is not a really offensive and, uncaring, unfeeling guy. You've listened to him for however minutes now. I think they can kind of pick up on that.
Yeah.
That
Good.
you're a pretty compassionate dude.
Yeah.
Well, Chris, as we get to the end, I want to ask you two last questions. Where can people find you?
Yeah, people can find me. They can find me. I have a website, chriscooper.co.uk. We're having a new one because it doesn't really reflect me anymore, to be honest. It's a new one's been developed, but you can contact me on LinkedIn. But do let me know where you discovered me and why you're connecting, because so many people try and connect and don't write, why, and therefore I don't connect with them. Also, if people really do want to get hold of me, but please don't fill my inbox with spam mail. Do send me genuine mails, but I don't mind people having my email, which is chris@chriscooper.co.uk.
Well, cool. Well, so my final question,
And of course,
on a daily basis,
Yeah.
what puts a smile on your face and brings joy to your heart?
I think it's a great question. On a daily basis, gratitude, getting out for a walk with my dog. I think reading something positive each day, writing something positive, and I think just probably thinking a little bit about my journey and kind of where I came from, and the people that I have a pleasure like you to know and be able to call my friends now. That gives me great pleasure, really. I never anticipated that I would have connections now all over the world. Particularly, I've done my show for 12 years, so I know a few people now. But I feel so blessed at who has become the people that have become my friends that I can learn from and their wisdom. So I think that gives me a lot of pleasure each day. I'm a garden too.
Well, man, thank you for being a great guest. Thank you for making time for the makeup interview. But and next when you talk to me, my voice should be somewhat back to normal.
Well, I wish you every success with that. I shall be thinking about you, sending you healing thoughts, and as I meet up with my collective group over the weekend, we'll all be sending you healing thoughts and best wishes. So, yeah, hope it all goes really, really well. I'm sure it will tomorrow.
Well, thank you, brother. Look forward to next time. That's all the time we've got. Dropping the mic, and we are out.
Hey guys, thanks for listening to or watching the Changemaker podcast today. Greatly appreciate it. If you're listening and you want to see the video, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel at Deke Copenhaver. That's pretty easy to remember, I would think. But really, we also want to remind you to like, subscribe, rate across all platforms, download. And if you're looking for a coach, a speaker, or anything, you know where to find me. Just email me at dekecopenhaver.com. And thanks so much for listening.